Okay, so I just got done skating 7 miles, and I think I am currently in a phase where I would rather be running than skating. But I don't know what's going on with that. I just got a whole new appreciation for running here lately. When I started, I looked it up the other day because I wanted to see how much I've actually improved in that, like the 5 times that I've gone or however many. And last time was like 13 minutes and 38 seconds per mile, which not fabulous, but at the same time better than it was. Got at least below 14 miles that time around, so there's that. But when I looked it up, the first time I ran, it was at like 16 miles or 16 minutes per mile. So it's like, oh, I guess I have improved some. I got distracted by a rock, so I don't normally sit in the rocks, but I am today, and I'm taking this one. So yeah, I don't know. I think I probably just had too much family today, to be honest. I woke up this morning and like I had my little daydreams, if you want to call them that or whatever, kind of playing through my head. And like 4 times in this little daydream span of time, got the message of don't shrink. And it's like everything in me, like I could feel feel me slipping back into that habit of kind of shrinking back. Just the imagined scenarios that I wasn't even in, right? Just like how I would respond to being in those actual scenarios. And then of course the anxiety kind of starts building, and then it's like, you're doing it again. And then, then I get these messages, don't shrink, don't shrink. And sure enough, I'm kind of shrinking. So I decided earlier I wanted to skate pretty quick today. And I was kind of thinking that if I make the weekends my skate days, then I can skate however early I want to and not have to worry about school traffic. So then if I just run during the week, that would work out okay. But I was definitely planning on skating. And, I started off with, I did eat something, so I guess that's technically where I started today. Because I skate better if I eat within an hour beforehand, and then, or at least an hour beforehand. I skate a little better when I have fuel in my system, if you will. But then I went outside to throw the ball for Gidge. As I was on my way outside, my mom says that my aunt wants to come over and bring her dog for a play date. It's like, oh goody. It's like, well, I'm going to go skate here in a little bit, but that's about the extent of what I'm doing on that end. So my aunt comes over, her and her husband both, and they bring the dog. And I was already in the backyard because I was throwing the ball for Gidge. And started talking to my aunt over the fence, and she can't hear real well. She's got hearing issues, so I went over to the fence and was talking to her there, and then she said something about, do you want her just handed over? It's like, I don't care. So you'd probably be easier on that end rather than having all the dogs charge into the house knowing that they were on their way in with the dog. So my uncle picks her up and unclicks the leash and everything and hands her over. He's the one. I don't like being handed the dog from him, to be honest, because he's the one that has the tendency to be the inappropriate toucher, if you will, and never directly grabbing anything or whatever, but still getting too close to your boob, for instance. So I'm always kind of reluctant to take anything from him anyway. Same guy that when I was like, 8 or 9, I don't even know what was going on, but we've been playing as this little kid, and we had this new room addition on our house, and they were over there, or at least he was, and my mom was in the kitchen, and he went to take something from me and like rubbed like his entire forearm up against my crotch. And of course everything in me was like, and then the kind of panic. And then my mom called me over real quick, and because of my mom also, when she asked if he had touched me, I said no because I was afraid I would get in trouble. So it's that kind of history right there. So and my mom's the reason why I had that idea, because when the shit with my cousin started going down, which was before that, she was the one that, just threw on the guilt and shame as hard as she could for this little kid who didn't know shit about anything. But she made sure to make me feel really shitty about it, so that sidewalk is new. So yeah. Rather than asking me what had actually happened with my cousins who actually have any sort of insight, she just assumed that what the boys said was true, and that was the extent of it, right? So of course then this thing comes up with my uncle, and I knew she saw it, but at the same time, she was far enough away that she couldn't tell entirely. But since I'd gotten in trouble the last time, I was afraid I was going to get in trouble that time too. So it was just, I lied about it and said no. So yeah. Well, I've been skating around here today. I was just kind of thinking about how, just energetically speaking, it feels like there's a bit of a purge going on at this point in time. And then, as I started skating, because I hit 4 miles and I wasn't really ready to be done at that point. I probably was ready around 5, but I, with my numbers, since I'd already made it past 4, pushed to 7. And then, as I got in those last couple of miles, I started thinking about stuff on that end. Taking that one too. And yeah. So then I was thinking, it's like, okay, so going back to this don't shrink thing, right? The message this morning that I got 4 times. That I'm skating, or that I'm not before I'm skating. Then I'm out in the yard with the dogs, and then I was anticipating my aunt would just hand the dog over because she's not that heavy. But no, of course that's not how it goes, and my uncle puts the thing down that he's carrying to pick the dog up to hand it over, and yeah. And then while I was skating, I was thinking, I wonder if that was kind of like the sort of warning on the don't shrink thing, because I've lashed out at that dude before. I talked about several times about when it was a Sunday evening thing over at my grandparents' house, and Gracie and her mom and dad were there, which was kind of an unusual thing. But Gracie went over to my aunt and uncle's house with my uncle and my dad. And of course, never been big on her being around him on that end. But we've been telling the kid for a long time at that point not to pick up the dog. Because, the one of our dogs that she was able to pick up was a 13-year-old. We've also watched her drop her. So, they got this corgi. So she got a long back. So she very much needs to not be dropped, right? Not that any of them need to be dropped, but especially one extra long, I guess. But that day, as they were getting ready to come back over to my grandparents' house, I was sitting outside. I was the only one outside over at my grandma's house. And Gracie picks up the dog, and I told her, I said, do not come out of that fence while you are carrying that dog. I said, you are not supposed to be carrying her. Put her down. And, she kind of is trying to rely on my uncle to allow her to do it, because he said she could do it. And he hadn't been around for all the times that me and my mom and my aunt had told her not to pick the dog up. But still, doesn't really matter. But, she agreed and put the dog down, but she was upset about it and, was trying to say, well, he said I could. And it's like, I don't care. You know that you're not supposed to, because, you've been told several times by me and Grandma and our aunt that you're not supposed to be doing that. I said, so you know better, and you're not supposed to be doing that, period. Right? And my uncle comes in, and he gets all like, between the fence between their property and my grandparents' property and the back porch over at my grandma's property, he got all puffed up and was feeling all big and tough about himself, and comes over and says something about who made me boss of their dog or something. And I just said, you're a fucking dumbass, and shut up, or whatever. And there was an eruption, and then I walked away, right? And walking away was going back home, because I was like, nope. And I sent my mom a text and told her what happened as far as that whole thing goes. She knew something had happened. She was sitting at the table in the house, and she saw that there was a little bit of an eruption, but then she saw me walk away, and when everything kind of calmed down over at my grandma's house, she said, you can come back. It's just us over here now. And, I think my aunt was over there. And I said, no, I'm good. I said, did you hear what happened or what was said or whatever? And she said, no, she saw that something had happened, but she didn't hear any of it, which I was surprised about, because I figured she would have been able to, since she was sitting by the window. But it was closed. So I gave her the spiel about what all had happened, and, including the part where the kid had been told multiple times not to pick up the dog. All three of us knew, because we've been telling her, usually while we were together, not to be doing that. And so then, my uncle gets in the middle of it, and then there's that whole thing. But anyway, I gave my mom the spiel, and she says, well, do you care if I tell, your aunt? And I said, no. I said, I was going to send the message to both of you. I said, but then I just figured I'd calm down first, because I was pissed. And, I guess after I sent my mom that message, and, she let my aunt read it, then my uncle went over there again, and I don't know what exactly he had started with. I think he was trying to say we just had a disagreement or something. And disagreement or misunderstanding, I don't even remember. But I think this was like 2023. But after, my mom and my aunt are like, yeah, we heard. And then, then he's got to puff up and act all like Mr. Tough Guy or whatever. That's what's kind of cool, too. He puffs up and spouts off about something about me undermining his authority over as a pet parent or something. And my aunt was like, oh, you mean how you were trying to undermine my authority as the pet parent? So there's apparently an ordeal on that end, right? But I went home and I was like, okay, it's like that was a big explosion, and it seems like there was more to it than just what was going on in that moment. So, right, so I'm sitting there thinking, where is this coming from? And then, of course, that was exactly what I went back to, is that, being that little 9-year-old kid in the newly finished room addition at our house, and him doing that. And it's like, yep, that makes sense. But, yeah. And that's something that, that was one of those things. It's like, aside from that being in that moment, it was one of those things that I tried to bury because everything else fucking hurt, and why do I need to carry that shit around too? So then when the eruption happened, then it was like, oh yeah, I do remember that. And it's like, I'm pretty sure after that whole thing happened, I'm pretty sure that was partly why there was like my mom and the other sister and my grandma, they wanted no part of any of the other girls being around him unsupervised, right? So my cousin, that's the one that, that's her dad. She didn't have a choice, but the rest of us, they tried to avoid that. But it was one of those things, it's like they couldn't, they mainly just said that they didn't want us around him unsupervised, and that was that. But then too, it was like, he's got 2 kids, and God only knows what, if anything, might have ended up going down on that end. Honestly, in that situation, I'm more concerned about his son, but he hasn't really said anything specifically either. But still, it's like it just seems like there's a lot of hard feelings on that end, and he's the one that has the aversion to the family for various reasons, so, which makes perfect sense to me. That too being the cousin that when he was born, I was relieved because I wouldn't be at the the shit end of the list by myself anymore. So yeah. But like that day, like when I went off, I feel like that was, I wasn't really, like, I was trying to set boundaries and distance myself from the family a little bit, but I hadn't really found ways to do that successfully on my own. That was one of those things, like, once I got to the classes at Inner Path, and then, I started learning specifically about ways to do that, then, that kind of was immensely helpful. But I feel like in that moment, that was like one of those instances where I was, granted it took an explosion because he was, essentially he was undermining my authority over my niece, because I'm a lot closer to him than he is, or to her than he is. So, spent way more time with her. That's my brother's kid. So I feel like I do have more say-so when it comes to her. Just because he's older than me is completely irrelevant, because that's my brother's kid. But, yeah. I'm just looking at all the pretty rocks. That one has like a pink line going around it. I kind of see it. Anyway, the other day at class, there was a thing that happened that I think it kind of goes back to this point too. There's this couple in class that I've thought since I first ever saw them, they seemed really familiar. And I thought probably from the school system, but I couldn't confirm it, and I couldn't quite place it. And aside from that, I kind of just, shrugged it off and didn't think about it. I told Annie the other day after, they said something about the school and I made the connection. I was like, I said, I'm pretty sure that's why there was a little bit of a block to that. The part I didn't say was, was that, I'm pretty sure my parents did not like them. And I'm pretty sure, I've never really felt especially warm and fuzzy to them either. But of course, part of my view might have been skewed because they were athletic department and I was band. But, like, I didn't fully register the connection. And I told Annie that I thought part of that gap on, registering it was the fact that if I would have made the connection sooner, I probably would not have been as open with the class on a lot of things as I have been, especially when it comes to, like, family drama and whatnot. And, she said that, of course, that makes sense. And it's like, I didn't, I said that, when I was talking to her, that I was pretty sure that, my family didn't like them, but I couldn't really remember exactly that information. I said I just pretty confident that was the case. And I said that if I would have made that connection sooner, I probably would not have been as open in the class as I have been. And I feel like a big part of my being there has been for the sake of that's the one place I can be more authentically myself. Those fucking days, man. And that was kind of the point of me being there, especially as much as I have been, was having a space where it's okay to be me. But I will say, since I made that connection, you know, of course there's the part of me that's like, what all have I said just to Annie versus what have I said to the actual class, right? And just trying to figure things out on that end. And then feeling bad because there's potentially people that have any kind of connection back to my family, and it's like, you know, so it's like, this is exactly why that block was there, is because I wouldn't have been able to open up and talk as much as I have. And I've needed that. So it was kind of just ignoring the fact that, you know, like I'm not going to say I'm particularly fond of these people anyway. Never have been, like even in that class space, you know, and I can't place them exactly for who they were in that space. I just know they were connected with the athletic department, and of course, you know, band and athletic department. Yeah, we definitely had our differences, especially this school, since the drum line was the school's first ever state championship, and then we got a national world championship the year or the next year before any of the athletics did anything on that end. So there were a lot of people that were kind of pissed at us for that. And yeah, sucks to be them, I guess. But yeah. Hair thing. But yeah, like, there's been a couple days, well, at least once that I've gone into that class, and for some reason there is a political discussion going on, and he's very much like the privileged white guy in the town, you know, the white town, with his viewpoints and everything, and kind of tearing down the people that were concerned for various other things while in the space. So it's like, he's always had that energy. That's never not been there, and I picked that up before I even got there in the middle of that political discussion that time. You know, and that day, I didn't stay in the class while that conversation was being had. Annie was out in the store getting stuff ready for the class, and she did not know that conversation was going on, and at that point in time I just like stood up and walked out of the class and like hung out in the store until it was time for it to start, and she went back in there because it was like, yeah, I don't want to do that. And there were a couple people that were new. I don't know if the one girl ever came back or not, but she said it was talking about, you know, the intensity of the conversation when, you know, and not really knowing what to do with it. It's like, yeah, that's why I walked out. It's like, I don't want any part of that. But then it's like, even in this space where, you know, we're pretty open and people generally care about people, there's still the privileged white guy with his looking down on everybody else kind of viewpoints and energy, and that's absolutely what it is. Like, you know, I kind of wanted to talk to Annie a little bit more, and then just a little bit when I was walking out of the building with her on Wednesday, the restaurant. But I overheard her talking to somebody, and they were talking about the political end of things with him and his wife, and, you know, how they're largely why that conversation can't be had, because there are some very big opinions in there, and, you know, it gets heated in no time at all. It's like, yeah, exactly. But it's like, that's also, you know, why, you know, that's one of those spaces. It's like, that's the only safe space that I've had to go, right? Other than hanging out by myself, which, you know, granted, I have no problem hanging out by myself. I kind of tend to prefer it over all these days. This one's kind of kind of orangey. Let me just sit here and let all the rocks catch my attention as the sun shines on them. But yeah, it's like that energy's always been there too, and it's like I never really wanted to spend too much time around them, and then that actually came up. It's like, that's why. And I told her flat out, it's like, if I would have made the connection exactly who he is, it's like, and even now I haven't made the connection of exactly who he is. I know he has a familiar face, but I cannot place it exactly. Like, you know, I don't know his last name, and I can't figure out exactly how I remember him, but I remember him being there. And, you know, of course, after, you know, because the thing that came up was the dragon, because we were talking about animals and whatnot. And he said that, of course, he worked over there for a time and was connected to the athletic department. It's like, oh, that's why it is. You know, and when I said, you know, because as I've talked about on here, it's like a lot that my high school and band stuff is largely where I started making some of the early connections. You know, I've talked about like the Year of the Dragon thing on here before, and just like the dragon connections, and then how those have seemed to take on a whole new layer of meaning, I guess, as like the twin flame thing came up, and then, you know, I'm navigating my way through making sense of how things fit together. So yeah. But yeah, when I said I went there, they were like, yep, we know. It's like, I know that, but I don't know exactly why I know that for you. And it just seems very much like they know and they don't care that I don't know, right? So then it's like, ooh, then there's that additional shady layer too. So it's like, yeah, so I will say I do think there is a certain amount of difficulty I'm going to have in wanting to go back to that space now that that connection's a little more clear. You know, and it's like I've already talked about, you know, the stuff I've said about my family, and I don't think that surprised any of them, to be honest. But, or like those two anyway. But still, you know, there's still that part that automatically feels bad because, you know, going back to the piece of, you know, the family and keeping the illusion alive and whatnot. And it's like, I was never here to keep the illusion alive, but at the same time, that being one of the first spaces I've been outspoken about the illusion for the family, and then having somebody that it has some sort of awareness of my family, and it's like, it just, I don't know, there's just that layer of ickiness to it that I'm not a fan of. You know, but like going back to that don't shrink thing, I wonder if part of that, I think part of where that has come in at is making that connection for one thing. And of course, in this town, you know, I've spent a lot of my time trying to hide out, right? Less so more recently, but I'm not in the school system anymore, so yeah. While I was in school, oh yeah, I was hiding out all the time. You know, I think part of it is it just brings that back. You know, that feeling of not wanting people to be aware of me. So hiding out in the bathroom because that seemed like the safer spot than whatever else. anyway, when my aunt and uncle were over there earlier, of course, I feel like that was a piece of it, like that don't shrink message was because of that. And it's like, if I'm more fully leaning into the full expression of me, I feel like my energy has certain barriers to it for, toxic people like my family members. And, then with handing the dog over the fence and all that, it's like, and then of course my skate gets delayed by like 2 hours because they're there. And I said before they came over that I was getting ready to go skate. And my mom was just like, oh, it won't be that long and blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah. It's like the problem is, okay, first off, their dog, okay, you've seen my dogs. My dogs aren't well behaved. I'm not going to try to act like they are by any means. However, that said, their dog has had no training whatsoever. So like mine are capable of sit, stay, leave it, and kind of showing off for treats and whatnot. But, Taz and the barking and just, all that stuff. Their dog very much believes it's the leader because over there she is. And bringing that energy around my dogs gets a little chaotic. And I don't like bringing her around mine too much now that she's a little older. Ziva's 12 and she like pouts hard when that dog is around. And like she was trying to talk me into staying in my bedroom while she was here. Ziva, like, I opened the door so I could pour my water out into the dog bowl so I could, refill my water cup so I could go skate. And when I opened the door, she just like pushed in and got on her bed and sat there and was just like, come on, stay in here. Don't make me go back out there. So, and then a couple times she disappeared and was hiding in my bathroom. And it's like, yep, she hates it when that dog is around. And largely because that dog doesn't have respect for anybody, right? There's a certain degree of which she will submit to the bigger dogs, but not entirely, especially now that she's a little bit older and bigger. I mean, not much bigger, but she's still kind of little. But big attitude. And I think Ziva also is concerned, like every time she knows we're going over there to pick my aunt and her dog up, Ziva just kind of, it's like, don't do it. Except she also knows that when my aunt goes with us, that's usually when she's getting ice cream, but yeah, it's still not her favorite thing when they go, and I get that, because, I've talked a few times about how it gets kind of chaotic when we're walking and we have the extra with us. And, like, used to, it wasn't that big of a deal, and, like, my aunt and I could have good conversations and everything, and she's, like, one of the few people in the family that knows that I'm doing this YouTube thing. But I think part of the difficulty is, I've talked about like the energetic cords and, how my family's all like latching on to suck the life out of everybody else. Well, since my brother and I pulled our energies back, my aunt still, she doesn't really have the awareness that that's the thing that she should do at all. She's, she's all about the church, so she doesn't think that would be a necessary thing anyway. So it's kind of like spending time with her. You can just kind of see how, like my mom and my grandma and my dad are kind of sucking the life out of her too. And it's like especially with the brain cells, man. You're trying to have a conversation and it's just like, but the last time she went walking with us, there was more frustration than normal, and I think a big part of it was because she was trying to let her dog have as much, she's not going to suddenly make her dog listen if she doesn't make her dog listen all the time, so then my dogs were getting a little more erratic, because usually if we're walking, I can keep them back by me, and it's not a problem. But then with that one getting in the way of things, like she would literally get in the middle of our group, and I have like 4 leashes, right? Because Piper's been going with us too. So I have these 4 leashes. Ziva does her own thing periodically, and she'll go from being on the same side with the other dogs, and I'll have the leash wrapped in my hand all nicely with all the others, and then all once she decides she's going to be on the other side of me, so she gets a little difficult. But then adding in that one, she's like getting her leash tied up with, whether it's around Ziva's leash because Ziva's on the one side by herself, or she's in the middle of the other 3 when we've stopped because I had to clean up somebody's poop or something. And it's like, keep your dog over there, dude. It's like, that should not be a hard concept to grasp. If I have, stopped to clean something up, don't let her in the middle of the whole group, because I have 4 leashes, and like at least 3 of them are like 6-foot leashes. I think the other one's less than that, but still right there all around my hand. And now I gotta stop and fight with getting her dog untangled from our group. And it's like, but the last time that she went with us, I was just kind of thinking that, she said before, when I've talked about disappearing from the family, she was like talking about, basically feeling bad if I disconnected from everybody, kind of a thing. It's like, well, she honestly would be the one I think that I would have the most difficulty disconnecting from entirely. But I also think that the universe is going to work that out of me. Because that is essentially one of those energy leaks. She's still very much connected to all the family members, so while they can suck the brain out of her, which granted, she died for like a half hour, so that was hard on her brain as well. But like, you can see how being around the family kind of does more to that. And yeah, I feel like part of what's happening now is the universe is going to make sure that connection is, or that I'm ready to disconnect fully from it as well. But yeah, it's still one of those things. It's like, it's still family, so it's still, there's obviously enough other issues on doing that, as far as, just the connection point, so it's like really smooth. Because here's the other half of it. But yeah. But I think part of it is, the universe is going to just keep lining me up with the stuff that shows that she's gonna have to be disconnected from too. And it too, it was her husband, and she, of course, she doesn't know about any of that stuff, but yeah. Just, thinking there was something else. They got over there today, and my aunt went into the living room, which that's the room that I will clean on occasion, because I have so much stuff in there. You know, I've talked a lot about how there are rooms that I don't have anything in, but, you know, like the kitchen table, that's a big one. So I don't have anything on the kitchen table, but there's never a space to sit at the kitchen table because, you know, my mom and my dad just like, they'll just like throw crap on the table and it just piles up and like they don't deal with it, you know. So, you know, my mom's freaking, she uses the table as her desk because it's a big table, but she's got like all this like nail polish and shit on this one corner, and you know, just miscellaneous stuff that she bought off Amazon, and then it made it to the table, but it didn't make it to wherever else it was going to go. It's like a little private one, I think. There's a little small airport down the road by the interstate. That looks like one of theirs. But anyway, you know, so like since they don't clean up after anything, I just stopped going in there because, you know, it literally just, their shit, their chaos just takes over everything. And so most of the time I don't even sit at the table when I'm going to eat something. Like if there's maybe a small section that I can, you know, put my fork when I'm cooking something in the microwave or whatever, you know, I'll do that briefly. But even that, like, I don't always, because there's not always room, you know. It's usually just like, okay, if I'm making a breakfast bowl in the microwave, I'll put the cheese, because I always add cheese to it, I'll put the cheese over on the bar and like right under the microwave, and on me, you know, wait for the microwave to finish, stir the stuff, put the cheese on it, throw it back in for another minute, you know, and then it's like very little. I try to do what I'm doing and get the hell up out of there as quick as possible, right? So, you know, and a lot of times if, you know, if my mom makes something for dinner, you know, she'll put it on the table and it's like there's no space for me. So it's like the intention is if I'm going to sit in there, I have to move stuff to be able to sit there. You know, and it's like, no, I'm not cleaning up after you anymore. I'm done with that. That's why I don't come in this room anymore. Unless I'm just like getting food. But like the living room, I have stuff in there. That's where I keep my skate stuff. That's where, you know, my dog crates are. My jackets, that kind of stuff. So I will clean that space. And, you know, especially since my dogs stay in there a lot when I'm not around. So there's a lot of dog hair in there also. So that's a room that I will clean. The kitchen floor on occasion gets cleaned because I clean it. You know, but that's usually I've stepped in something sticky and I don't know if it's coffee or if it's like pee. So I don't like that. So, you know, yeah, I'll run the mop over there or over it and all that kind of crap. But generally, I try to stay out of the spaces like that where they're literally just trying to make it so I have to clean up after them. But anyway, my aunt goes in there and she's looking at the couch and she looks at me and she says, "Is it safe to sit here or has it been peed on?" And I said, "Your guess is as good as mine." I said, "However, he sits there less than he sits anywhere else, so it's possible that it's okay." I said, "I usually just sit on the one corner when I'm putting shoes on and then go from there." I said, "The dogs lay here a lot, so it's mostly their couch." But that said, he will occasionally sit there. And I feel like that's usually if he's trying to force me to have to listen to some bullshit that he's listening to on his phone, or, I don't know, run my dogs out of where they normally sit. Because there again, that's what he does, right? You know, I've talked about literally anytime I've had a spot where I normally sit, then he starts taking it over. So, of course, like originally there was the couch, right? So the couch in the family room, there, the side closest to the bathroom, was where I would generally sit if I was going to watch like a movie or some TV show with my mom. And we used to do that a lot. And then when my dad retired, that became his spot. And then of course, because he plops and breaks everything, I don't want to sit there. But then also, you know, now he's got like all sorts of bladder shit going on, and, you know, pees all over the place and doesn't clean up after himself because he doesn't think he should have to. Of course, now he's got the strokes going too, so that's, you know, but he wouldn't clean up after himself beforehand. Why would he do it after the strokes, right? So it's like, no, I spent 40 years of my life existing solely for this purpose of them sucking the life out of me, right? And I end up cleaning up after their mess and basically not being able to have my own life of any sort because I was so busy losing time to cleaning up their shit and not realizing that that was the thing that was like the big holdup, right? So like, you know, I've talked about how I would get frustrated with the mess in the garage, and then I would be the one to go out there and start shoving stuff around, start, you know, putting stuff in the trash and, you know, starting to clear it out, right? And I think since I came back in 2019, I think I've done that at least 3 times. And anytime the car is going to end up back in the garage is because I've done the work to get stuff out of the way so it could go back in there. You know, but then, like the last time, my parents decided to sell the camper that they never should have bought in the first place. And, you know, rather than leaving the stuff that they got for free with the camper for somebody else to have, my mom takes everything out and puts it in the garage, right? So, like, and I say that because the lady, or the couple that they got the camper off of, loaded them up because they said that, you know, they had a bunch of camping stuff because they went a lot, and then they got rid of it because they didn't think they were going to do it, and then they ended up getting the camper again. That family loaded them up because they think their kids were going off to school, so, you know, they weren't sure that they were going to get to go anymore. So literally giving the stuff for no additional to my parents, and then my mom's like, I might be able to get some money out of that. So, you know, there's nothing she's willing to let go of for free. She wants to get the money out of it. But the problem is you can't get any money out of it if you don't post it, right? If you don't like do the work to clean it up, take the pictures, post it online, and advertise that you're trying to get rid of it. So, yeah. So then it just became, we couldn't park in the garage. And then the family friend, her sister had died, so they had an auction for, you know, her daughters to try to get some money out of their mom's estate. So my mom goes and gets a bunch of that shit too. There's like 2 little Christmas trees that are just chilling in the garage. You know, meanwhile the path is shrinking and nobody's doing a damn thing about it because if I don't do it, it doesn't get done. And I'm not just there to be their servant anymore. And it's really frustrating to exist in that kind of space because I am somebody that I very much feel like if I'm going to be there, I should be doing my part and cleaning up some too. The problem is, whatever I do, then they just move in and move the mess back to it. So it's like, you can't win under those circumstances. It's literally just, you know, you do all this work and then take a break and then just watch it pile back up and you didn't do anything to pile it back, right? So like, I would clean up the mess and then suddenly there's a mess creeping back in, you know, like clean up the stuff on the dog crates because that's where I put my skate stuff after I'm done, you know, so it airs out on top of my dog crates, right? So then my dad would come in and, you know, he's got a sweatshirt on there or his jacket or a blanket that he's used or coffee cups or whatever, just whatever in my stuff to make it so I have to clean up after him again. So no, I'm not trying to do that. And it's aggravating as hell. you know, but my aunt goes in there and she's trying to figure out if it's safe to sit there. It's like, I don't know. And she said something about the other room smelling. It's like, oh, I know. That I do know. I said, it smells like a nursing home, doesn't it? It's like, yeah, and that's just how it is at this point, you know, because I'm tired of being the only one to do any of that. You know, and of course, now my mom would say as much because I'm not helping her with her, like, her room and everything. And of course, I don't know. Like, if he messes in the bed, he doesn't even clean it up. So it's like, your room really smells. You know, and then she's like stripping the bed off and she's having to redo everything. And, you know, he's not doing a damn thing because, I mean, now he's kind of about the equivalent of a fruitcake, I think. But, yeah, so, but it's one of those things that's like, I can't feel bad for him just because he's had the strokes, because it's no different than how he would have done before. He's just now clumsier too and has less cognizant awareness of what he's doing, you know, but he knew what he was doing earlier on when he was doing that kind of shit. So it's like, yeah, I just don't feel sorry for you. So yeah. Anyway, guess I might go ahead and wrap this up. Maybe nab a couple more of these rocks that I keep looking at over there before I go. I was thinking, try to do some videos daily for a little bit, but not tomorrow, because tomorrow I have a concert that I'm going to. Another one that I go to by myself. Falling in Reverse and several other groups, but unfortunately not Slaughter to Prevail, because apparently they had travel issues and won't be able to make it. However, I did see them last year, so I mean, I saw like 3 of their songs last year, so but yeah, probably won't get a shirt because I have not thus far manifested the money to do so. So I'll just worry about, you know, the other bills that I have instead and just let that slide, I guess. But yeah, I'm going to go home and I think collect dogs to bring them out for a walk, because they got gypped yesterday and we haven't done it yet today. So, as always, I appreciate you. Until the next time. See ya.